welcome to this episode of The Latest Thread. And we're going to do some ditch talking today. Whether we stitch in the ditch or we don't, and why, and most of it, in my world at least, comes down to the customer's budget. So I don't want to take the whole conversation, but I just wanted to chat about it for a couple minutes before we share a bunch of pictures that show different examples. So technically I only ditch if I'm getting paid to ditch, if that's in the budget. And if not, and if it needs it, sometimes I call it faux ditching, where I just come close to stuff. But what do you guys do?
Well, I'm a ditcher. And I totally get your point. If it's in the budget, then you should definitely do it, because to me, it feels like it is more of a finished look, and it makes the piecing stand out. Obviously, it also helps with the overall stabilization, of the quilting. And I guess it all depends on what, who your customers are. Mine that asked me to do that type of quilting, they kind of want that, so they're willing to pay for it. So I guess, I'm lucky in that way because, we take pride in what we're doing. So you want them to give them the best possible finished look for their quilt. But yeah, you're right. They,
like on a Judy Niemeyer quilt, you can spend 10, 15 hours just ditching. And that's some people, more than some people's entire budget for a quilt. So
yeah,
that's for sure.
And I kind of do the faux a lot of times if they're not going to want that stitch in the ditch. I mean, if you do a tight background fill, you can make it look stitched in the ditch easily. So, I'm okay with that. If that's, and sometimes one of the biggest problems that I find is if they're, right away, I think if you have a customer quilt and you look at it and, the seams aren't good.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd stitch that in the ditch. It's not going to be fun. It'd be a lot more work. You're manipulating things. But the problem I find is that when you turn that thing over and look at the back, it looks like you did something totally weird. Right. And my concern with that is that when a customer looks at that, they don't understand what that is. They don't understand that your quilt was poorly pieced or things weren't good, and this is the best I could do. They're going to look at that, I am assuming, and think that you screwed up.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, not necessarily poorly pieced though. You want, it's poorly pressed.
That too. One or the other. Yeah. Sometimes like when you're trying to do something that's like maybe a pattern where these blocks come together, and then you're going to come a different direction. No, but it doesn't really meet. You know what I mean? And then it's like your stitch went down, over, and it looks like you had a bobble, but you did not.
Yeah, you're just following the seam, right?
So a lot of times I'll just do something else, something that will kind of give the same end effect without anyone having to worry about feeling like they did a poor piecing job or that I did a bad quilting job. So
I'm getting better at this. I press a lot of my seams open, which is, I know it's like so bad, and I'm getting better at pressing them over. But because I do that, I've kind of gotten to the habit of like, here's my ditch, and I literally stitch right next to it on this side. So this side's open. So it's like, it's microscopically near the ditch. Yeah. I'm getting better. Yeah.
Well, that's hard to do. I'll try to avoid trying to stitch in the ditch for open seams whenever possible, to stitch across them instead of trying to. I'm just doing a QuiltWorks quilt right now, which, just said 10, 15 hours, and it's like 100 by 100. And I feel like I'm going to be behind it for like the next 3 months. But, and I just did it yesterday where I was actually filming a video and showing how to try and stitch in the ditch on one side when a seam is pressed open. And I was on one side and then the fabric shifted a little bit. And then I was in the middle of the ditch. So you couldn't even see my stitches anymore. And then it popped over to the other side. So it's really, really difficult to control those.
I'm not talking about your quilt. Obviously, I haven't seen it. But when they asked me to do ditch work and I explained to them, you pressed your seams open. Well, that's what the pattern asked for. And I took a class. Yeah, I understand, but then it just looks more sloppy than what it's worth, really, for putting the time in. Because you're right, it goes all over the place. It looks sloppy because you see a section and then you don't. So it looks almost like if you're using a variegated thread, that's really has the long segments. And that's what it looks like when you're ditching in those open press seams, because you only see part of it.
Yeah.
I think too, the worst is when the seam is good, it's pressed to one side and you're going along, but oops, they now have the seam the other way. So where do you go? I usually hop because it needs to stay in. I can't, you probably picked your thread to match the one you were going to do. So now if I hop over to that other side, it's going to really be awful.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I make my own, and that's different. When you're making your own quilt, I piece it because I know mostly how I'm going to quilt it. And I know I want to do this in the white thread or the whatever color it happens to be. So I'll press those seams to accommodate my quilting. I don't care what the pattern's telling me.
Yeah.
I want to be able to stitch where I want to stitch.
Yeah, I have a hard time with the whole budget part, going back to what you were asking at the beginning, because even if it's not in the customer's budget, it's still my work. It's still my work going on. And it's really difficult sometimes because if it's a quilt that's maybe a little bit smaller, that takes me a couple or 3 extra hours to do that extra work. If I can, I'll probably just do it anyway, but don't tell anyone.
You just told the world there, didn't you?
But most of the time, a good consultation with somebody, you can either say, okay, I can make a quilting plan for you. If you really don't want to stitch in the ditch, this is what it's going to look like. And I know we're going to share some pictures coming up of some examples of what those things could look like. And so recreating some of those things to show people would really help them say, okay, well, is it worth it to you to have this as a finished product? Or would you rather have this as a finished product? And then I have to combine that with what finished product am I happy with going out the door? Because other people aren't going to know when they look at that quilt that person's showing off, takes to Guild or wherever, they're not going to know the conversation that the client and I had about, I don't want to spend that much.
Yeah.
So then they're like, oh, well, she didn't ditch any. Well,
that happens a lot because I get multiples of the same quilt by friends. And I'm not talking money, but I'll get after the fact. How come hers was double mine was double the price of hers? Because you wanted everything ditched. You wanted microscopic fills. Hers just has loopy fills, which you can do, in a quarter of the time. So yeah, and that, I don't want to say it aggravates me, but it does bother me when friends say that. Well, she charged me this much. How come you only paid this much? But I don't think the why.
Yeah, and I don't think I would do it for free because, it is their quilt and their budget. I mean, it's the same as when someone brings you a quilt that should be custom quilted and they want an edge to edge. I'm not going to custom quilt it for free because I feel like it should be custom quilted. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Well, the reverse can be true as well. I mean, there are some quilts that maybe they think that they want it custom quilted and you get it in the door and this just needs an edge to edge, and maybe it just needs a fancier edge to edge to make it look like something more special. And maybe you charge a little bit more per square inch for that fancier design. But I think there's some things that we can do in our consult with them to make sure that we
Yeah.
We're the professionals, right? So we got to.
Well, and it all depends too. Like in my case, for instance, I get predominantly traditional quilts. So, I'm in Ohio, so, they're making mostly from what I get traditional quilts. So I think I mean, edge to edge out of the conversation for those, but the custom ones, they want them to look like traditional, like in their mind, a traditional quilt should look like, in, including the fact that they want to see a on the back side of the quilt. Hence, I often get solid backs because they want to see, the quilting replicated on the back of what they pieced in the front. So, they're more apt to want to include the stitch and the ditch around each one of their whatever Ohio Star blocks, rather than just me plopping a design on top of it. So it really depends, what type of quilts you're taking in. But, you know, I used to do things for free a lot, adding things because I thought it needed it. And like Sharon said, it would enhance it and you're standing, behind what you're doing. But I stopped doing that because, I ended up doing a custom quilt for less than minimum wage. And so, I decided, well, I could work at a fast food place for that.
Yeah, I definitely draw the line somewhere. Like I said, if it's a couple of hours, to me, that's not that to me, that money that I don't pay for advertising for my work is my advertising fee, my advertising fund. I'll put in a little bit extra time on things here and there, but I make sure that they know, hey, this is the value of that. But I'm not going to spend 10, 15 hours doing it on one of those fancy quilts. It definitely,
The only
I'm
time
not
I
going to
get
be a pushover on it.
if I want to try something and like the
Mhm.
quilt's optimal for trying what I'm thinking, then I might throw that in there only
Yeah.
because I'm benefiting it from the future. But yeah, I
Mhm.
don't for free because I ditch slow.
And the best thing to do is to try to come up with a design or a travel path that you can ditch at the same time. Is oh, I have to get over here, so I have to ditch anyway.
Can you figure it out in the last row?
And you figure it out in the last row.
I
It really save you money or time.
I think too, one other thing real quick. So if someone doesn't want ditching, but it kind of needs it, it's a really good way to make you be more creative because you have to come up with a way to achieve that effect without doing it. So I think it's kind of a challenging thing sometimes.
how can I get that
Yeah,
ditched
and,
effect without ditching? Yeah. Mhm.
and it's faster.
Shall we look at some pictures?
Yeah, I was just about to say, let's look at the pictures because they'll have more idea what we're talking about.
All kinds of eye candy here.
These are things that you can easily make your own samples to show your customers. So these are just 3 different examples. It's one piece of fabric with 1 bar stitched and 3 little appliques. And do not judge me on my appliques because it was only for a sample. But the first one, there's no ditching at all. It's just a loopy meander. The middle one is what I call faux ditching, which is how you take your background fill and you work the ditch in as you're going. And I kind of exaggerated it. If I were really faux ditching it, I probably would have made sure to hit everything. I just exaggerated it a little so you could see that it's not quite ditched. And then on the right side is full ditching with a much denser background fill. And I always say when you look at the front of things, you don't notice as much, but when you flip it over and the next picture is the backs in the same order, when you look at the back, you see it all. So you see like the no ditching is wobbly, wonky, puffy everywhere. And there's no defined space, I guess you'd say. The faux ditching, it's kind of there. And then the full ditching, it's there.
Mm-hmm. It's a really good visual.
Mhm. Well, because you know, under no ditching, obviously you see it the most, that you totally lose the effect of what the bar is supposed to do, which is supposed to separate, you know, the other areas. And that effect, I didn't see it as much on the front, but
Never
on
see it as much on the front. Yeah.
Did you use the same kind of batting in all of these samples?
Yeah,
Karen?
it's one piece. It's just when I
Okay.
took, I zoomed in with the picture, so that's why it's a little bit different in the, not the resolution, the coloring of it, because it
Mhm.
depends where I am under my overhead lights.
It just, you can see the firmness of how the finish of this over here, and then just the progression of to
And,
nothing.
and this is just
There.
one layer 80/20. I didn't want any like special effects or anything. I
Right.
just wanted to show what the thread did with a single layer back on that fabric.
Yeah.
This is the same thing. On the left is, and I quilted them exactly the same, other than the left is not ditched and the right, everything is ditched. And again, on the front, you don't quite notice it unless you zoom in. Sharon, can you zoom in between the like the center of the top where there's half
Yeah.
triangle?
The left block or the
With both
one
of them,
unditched?
the left and the right together.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. So that the only place like it jumps out to me is see the green half square triangles.
Mhm.
On the left one, it's just probably my open seams. And on the right one, it's actually ditched. And that's where it jumps out to me. So unless you're really inspecting up close in something that has this many different color fabrics, you're not going to notice
Right.
the ditch or the not ditched. If this were all solids, every piece was the same, you know, the same solid fabric, it would jump right out to you. But on the average pieced quilt, it's not quite as noticeable.
It brings to mind is sometimes when you have a quilt that maybe the stitches per inch when they were piecing it weren't quite high enough. I am not being critical at all, but you know how
when these were pieced?
you can see, especially if the seams are pressed open, sometimes you can see that the threads in there, even if they're pressed to one side and they're pressed like they really reefed on when they were ironing it, not pressing. I think that stitch in the ditch would really help to stabilize some of those things. And that's one of the things that we could recommend to people and say, hey, look, in order to give this quilt stability after when you're using it and loving it, washing it and using it more, is it does need to be ditched. So really looking at the quilt, whether it's pressed open or not, and looking at the integrity of the stitching and the seams itself can help with that decision in the consult, I guess. That's what I mean.
So yeah, if you ever have orphan blocks, save them because they do this. They just make really good samples for when you're talking about this kind of stuff. And the next
Yeah.
picture is the back of these as well, showing what it looks like from the back. So there's no ditching and then there's full ditching.
But those look fine. I think both look good from the
Those
back.
look good. It's just like the ditched one is much more crisp to me.
Sure.
Like everything's defined, it has its space, you see the piecing, whereas the no ditching is just your quilty happiness landing. You know, you don't see the piecing as much.
well,
I
honestly,
think another and really important thing too, if you're not going to ditch, is being very careful with your quilting density.
Yeah.
Because if you had this had less quilting on the blocks, you would have seen that puffy, saggy, like on the previous sample, where here you really don't, because the density is really good,
well, and I also wanted to say that even though my preference is the crispness that you see on the right-hand side, however, because of the design choices, I think that left picture with no ditching is still super pleasing and and honestly achieve the same effect overall, other than the lack of crispness. But I think that's surprisingly to me, seeing it like that.
You
Fine.
need to go make some samples now.
No, really, but I think it's Jody's right in regards to, the balance of the density and the design choices that you made.
Yeah. The only thing I don't like on this, on the no ditched one, is the feathers are just kind of hanging there. If you look at the feather part, it's not
Where they're
finished.
at the bottom.
Anywhere on the feather where it comes to what would be the spine, there's nothing there. It just bounces into the non-ditched ditch. All right, now these are customer quilts. And the one on the left is not ditched, was not in the budget. And the one on the right is, and I say mostly ditched because there's some things that I didn't ditch. And then you'll see the backs as well.
So should we zoom in on those a little bit?
Sure.
Just
But I mean, you can still do these Niemeyer quilts or Quiltworks quilts without ditching every single thing. It's just not as defined. So this has like no ditching in it. You'll see when we get to the back of this one.
But they usually have so much going on that it's not necessarily taken away,
Right. And then this one is very much ditched. I think there's just a couple things I didn't ditch.
yeah, and your choices with some of these your quilting designs, like you've got a super dense fill right there, and then also you'll need to be traveling when you're stitching this double piano key in there. So you could work your ditching right into your design
Yeah.
and make it go faster.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Okay.
that's like a good example of same quilt, two totally different budgets.
Oh yeah, it is the same quilt.
It's the same quilt. I know. That's why I put it
The
next to
colors are so different. Yeah, and it's you're looking at the big flat shot of the one on the right versus just a corner of the other one. It
Well, yeah,
didn't-
this depends on what time I finish my client work. If it's during the day and I can get it on the boards in front of the window, you'll get the one on the right. But if I finish it at nighttime, you get the one on the left. So this is the backs of those same quilts. So the one on the left is the not ditched one, and the one on the right is the big flat one. That is mostly ditched.
Well, it's a little bit deceiving because on the one you have a print, whereas on the other you don't. So I think with the print, it looks very pretty and totally fine without ditching.
Yeah,
Because
like
you have that pretty print, whereas on the right, I like the definition.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, if you on the one on the left, like the row of pearls, it's not ditched. Like, and on the front, you don't notice it at all, but on the back, it's just pearls there in the middle of that stop border. It's not ditched at all.
Mhm. Yeah, what a difference.
Yeah.
But you're right, Ava, the backing fabric totally disguises it.
Yep.
It's so much more noticeable on the solid backing.
And again, two customer quilts, same exact quilt. One is not ditched and one is entirely ditched. Two very different budgets. And I know the one on the left's a little blurry, and I have back pictures as well of both of them. I just take too many pictures of my quilts. That's the problem. My client quilts.
That's a good thing. Everybody loves to see that.
Yeah. So like the one on the left, I just did continuous curve in all the rings, and on the one on the right, every single one is, well, it's actually double ditched because of the path. So it's up and then back down, over, up and back down. So, and you get even more definition that way.
The colors sure are gorgeous in this one, hey?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, just so jewelly, really pretty.
And that's the back of both of them. So again, they're still both beautiful quilts.
Yeah.
One is so much more defined and crisp with the ditching.
It's a nice backing.
Yeah.
With a little, that blue kind of almost look like it's
It's
somebody
like-
dropped some dye on it.
Yeah, it's just little splotches. And on that one, the not ditched one was just solid fabric. So it's
Yeah.
like the reverse of the last sample.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I added 2 little pictures of a close-up of hand applique of a before and after. So this is a little, actually, Karen, you helped me with this quilt. I don't know if you remember some of the bigger applique shapes. I was really struggling with how much stitching do I do inside some of those shapes. And this is that quilt. And I put some details inside some of the bigger pieces of applique and thought this would be a good way to show a before and after of especially with if you're adding quilting on the inside, because then it makes the outside edge of the applique kind of puff up a little bit. So even more it needs to be tacked down.
This is where I actually ditch outside of my appliques after I do my background fills. If it's a real dense background fill, because when I do my tiny background fills, it pulls, if I ditched my applique first, I do this tiny background fill, it actually pulls it away just a tiny little bit. So if I do all my background fill first and then ditch around my applique, it stays right where I put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like to do it as I go. So I'll be doing because then it's just faster.
Well, that was an interesting discussion. We got lots of points of view.
Yeah. And I realize I take way too many pictures.
So that's good. It's good for people to see that. Like when we're, going back to what we talked about in the beginning with having those consultations with people, it really helps them see the difference and the value in, hey, and this takes time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, all righty. We're going to take a really quick little break. And then when we come back, we are going to have our new little segment of our ideas for your quilt. And we have a guest joining us. So we'll see you back in 1 second. We are featuring our new a little segment to the latest thread, ideas for your quilt. And we did feature this a little in our last episode where we did 3 separate people's quilts, but we're going to just feature one at the end of each of our episodes. So we hope you enjoy. Today we are featuring Jules' quilt and she's here with us. Hi, Jules.
Hi, pleasure to be here. It's really nice to have your advice and guidance. This quilt evolved as I made it. The blocks, Dresden blocks, were a class I taught here in the UK and in New Zealand. So it's traveled a bit. I had no plan for the actual quilt and how it was going to go together. So my own hand dyes and the white Kona cotton in the background and just placed them where I thought was pleasing. Yeah. And then was too nervous and not confident enough to quilt it.
It's been traveling around unquilted.
Yes.
Hopefully we can help you with that. And then you can just jump on and tackle all that quilting.
Yes. It will be one of my near future projects, that's for sure.
Awesome.
And what about you, Jules? You can tell us how long you've been quilting and a little bit about your quilting experience.
Right. Oh gosh, I fell into patchwork quilting about 25 years ago and sort of jumped in the deep end for some reason and started teaching just beginners. And then about 3 years ago, I was traveling the Midwest in America with my husband, and he said, I'll go to a quilt show. And he bought me a long arm. I was in tears.
Wow.
I'm going back to the UK and there's a long arm on the way. Yeah. So but I only get to use it 6 months of the year because we spend 6 months in the UK and 6 months in New Zealand. We've got a daughter either end. And so I'm sort of playing catch up. So I watch virtual quilt shows. I went to the QWC in Palm Springs in 2019. And then I've been glued to your TV Gamel quilting shows and yeah, it's been brilliant. I'm just so hooked on it. I have my studio and this is my lockdown sanctuary.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Okay. And Sharon's going to share her screen, and we all did our little doodle on it. And I have to admit, when you get to mine, I didn't read your description of your level of quilting, so I kind of just went crazy with it, and I apologize in advance.
It's all
I'm
good.
sure I can pull segments from it.
Okay. All right. Awesome.
That is lovely.
So,
So, that is my drawing. I loved your quilt, especially with the open spaces and all the different Dresden plates. Very creative. So, it reminded me of flowers. So I thought it would be nice to add leaves in the outer border and then carry it on into one of the inner borders, just to give it that floral, flair. That's what I saw anyhow. And then in the Dresden plates, I think with your fabric choices, they're speaking for themselves. They're really pretty prints. So just follow along. I couldn't tell the scale of, the size of the plate. So, maybe it's enough to just stitch in the ditch around the plates.
Yeah, I think the largest plate is about 20 inches big.
The one on the top.
Yeah, the one on the top.
Yeah, and you
and it's
definitely can add some more. I thought it would be pretty to pop out certain colors like the yellow, make that really pop out because it seems prominent. So do a scribble stitch, in the pieces around the yellow to really make the yellow pop. So I think for that big one, you have all kinds of options based on your skill level. And then a lot of times I just look at what's already there in regards to the piecing and or the fabrics. And so for that inner border, that's kind of funky, with the stripes, I think it would be fun just to do a random, outline, just following the piecing that's already there, or it could just be a print. I couldn't tell.
No, it is pieced. So those are all my hand dyed fabrics as well. So that's why the colors are, consistent throughout. They're all different. But yes, it's all pieced, that border, out of the scraps.
Good use.
And then for the background, I thought if I go with the floral theme, just do a fill with like a scroll design. Of course, your options are endless. It depends on what you're looking for. I was thinking at first maybe a crosshatch, so it looks like the flowers are, floating on like a trellis, but that would be way too much work because you then have to connect around all those Dresden plates. So I don't know how much effort you want to put. So, but the point is you have all kinds of options in regards to the background fill to make those Dresden plates pop. So
Yeah,
that's
this is lovely. I mean, it would definitely get my free motion quilting practice
yes,
on the go, which I need because it's so easy to drop those patterns in there. I also like the way it moves as well. That's really nice.
Thank you.
Okay, move on.
This is mine. And I was kind of all over the place. And then I did think I should read what your skill level was before I went too crazy, because I would have done a ton of ruler work. But you said you don't do a whole lot of freehand.
I have just spent a week teaching myself ruler work. I'm determined to learn everything. So I have a quilt on the frame and it's just been rulered to death. So it's, yeah, really good. I'm getting there.
So, well, I kind of wanted to show, so I like the idea of making something look like it's traveling behind the other things. So I put those straight lines, and I probably might do more of those, just depending on how much background fill I wanted to do, because the more line things that you add in, the less fill there is around it. And even if you didn't want to use a ruler, you could do those really easily with wavy lines too. Or, I mean, you could even do one section of like straight lines and maybe one other section you did with the wavy lines, because that'd be kind of cool to mix it up a little bit. And then you have an elevate, right?
Yes, I do.
So for me, I feel like the Dresden plates, which it happens to be one of my favorite blocks, because they're prints, sometimes it's really hard to make quilting show on there. So I might just put something simple, and that's kind of what I drew there, because actually you could use your elevate to just put different size kind of nested circles in each of those, because it would kind of emphasize the circle of the Dresden. And then you see it, as opposed to trying to do a lot of individualized things in there that you may or may not see.
Yeah, I mean, there was so many Dresden plate patterns and I was like, oh my gosh, which one? And I just couldn't get one that really suited it. And so, yeah, just doing something simple like drawing the circles in them maybe and filling them in where I need to. That would
Yeah, I mean, it's an option. The other thing though, too, is if you want to practice your free motion, maybe you do want to do some things in the prints, because then if you have a little wobble, no one will notice it.
That's true. I have a few of those.
Yeah, me too. I think we all do. And then in the background, I would probably do something, I don't know, I just kind of scribbled in there. I would probably do a loopy kind of a backfill. And then in those, the multicolored bars going down, I just did wavy lines on those. But if you're practicing your ruler skills, I would do just ruler work in there, like whether it's in the ditch or if you just outline each individual shape inside of it, that'd be cool. And then the orange, I think, really pops to me. That's really draws your eye. So I would put less quilting on that to let it be, popped forward. So I would probably just echo in there, maybe, again, I don't know the scale of it, but maybe 1/4 of an inch in from each side.
Yeah.
To let it be a little bit puffier.
What I like about this is we've got the cross of the straight lines makes that recede and the Dresdens come forward. So that's quite a nice element.
Yeah. And the thing about it too, when I do something like that, I'll mark those on the quilt.
Right.
And you'll notice I made it so that where they cross is behind one of the Dresdens, so that you don't have to worry about what's going to happen where they cross, because it's behind the plate.
And when you're doing that and you get to the Dresden, do you just use your tie off function or do you pull your threads up and tie them in?
No, I don't bury. I don't tie and bury them. No, I would, because the thing is, more than likely, you're going to do a background fill around all the remaining areas. So you probably will be able to kind of go over it anyway.
Hide
No,
them.
that's really good. Yeah, I wasn't sure with competition quilts. I know people tie in. I've tied in straight line quilts before, and it takes a lot of time.
And it is, I mean, if you like to do it, I did it a few times and decided, no, that is not for me. I would prefer to hide where I put the start and stop. And in this case, it would be in the ditch of the Dresden plate.
Yeah.
So it's not like the line would end kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So
That's
It's
lovely. That's
a
very
lot
nice.
of work doing that.
Yeah. Oh, okay, this is mine and I did not follow directions. And I turned it sideways because when I looked at it, all I saw was like this flower garden. So, and I, like Jody was talking about, I like certain things to be behind things and other elements to be in front of things. So you see some of the flower stems go behind your border, while other flower stems go across the front. So it gives it a little bit of depth to it. And I would just mark that all out, just with a water soluble or air soluble pen, so that I made sure when I'm going from one side of the bar to the other, I'm matching up to the curve. And then I would just have fun and play in each of the Dresdens, something, a little similar, but different, so that they all have like a curl or a curve, but each one has its own little pattern. And then in the orange, I would just do straight bars, probably about a half inch or so. Like we had said, it's hard to tell scale, so you don't know how wide you should go. But I mean, half inch is usually pretty safe. And then just some really swirly, loopy, fun background fill.
That'll keep me busy. That'll keep me busy. Gosh, it's lovely. It's a real flower garden. Yeah, I hadn't even thought of a flower garden with it. That's really
As soon as I saw the picture, I'm like, I want to turn it. Okay.
That's really nice. I like that. Would it
Okay.
be too heavy? Would it be too? That's one of the things I was going to ask about the wadding. I'm going to use a white wadding. Would I do 2 layers? And that would make that background fill recede.
Yeah.
And
So that would, anywhere that's not quilted would then pop right up, because
Mm.
with the 2 layers of back. Yeah.
That's excellent. Love it. Love it. Whoa.
I think I turned mine sideways in the picture because it was easier to draw on, I suppose you could, with any of the drawings that we've all done, you could do them upright or sideways. You could change the orientation of how you hang it on the wall based on the space that it needs to go in. And I think I have a little bit of an advantage because I see everybody else's drawings first and then I do mine last, because they send their pictures to me because I screen share. So I don't know if it's an advantage or not. Maybe it's more of a challenge because I have to think of something to do that hasn't already been done to give you more options. And I'm a feather lover, so anywhere I can put some feathers, I'm going to take advantage of it. And like everybody has said, with the ideas of having things look dimensional and having the flowers sitting on, or the Dresden sitting on top and the quilting kind of receding in the background. When I've put these feathers in and around the this border here, you might have to draw a few of them just to, like Karen said, to making sure that those angles look like they're continuing underneath and they poke out at the right spots. But having those feathers look like they're just tucking underneath all of those pretty Dresdens, and going around in one direction, and then on the borders going the opposite direction to what this feather is. So if this one's coming up, then we go down on the other one. And if this one's going right, then we go left on that one. In the rainbow section, I just did straight lines because you've got enough going on there. Stitch in the ditch would be just fine to outline them.
Mhm.
But depending on how wide that space is, you might just want to put a little 1/2 inch channel on each side. And then if you're using that double batting or wadding, then that center area would have a little bit of rise to it and have just a nice little bit of dimension. And if it's still too big and there's still too much, you could go in there and do a row of pearls or another straight line or a little row of ribbon candy or something that you feel comfortable with just to fill the space in. But the feathers on either side in the white space is already making it busy. So in between that is just kind of like a, okay, stop, and just straight lines is fine. I liked Karen's idea of the straight lines in the orange border. And because we've got straight lines in the colored border, straight lines in the orange border would go great, but they're just going the opposite directions. So just kind of keeps your eye moving in different ways. Couldn't decide on what background fill would look really good. So I just doodled a few. There's some overlapping swirls and then some pebbles, and just even a tiny stipple meander would look great behind them, because they, there's so much going on already that I don't think you need to worry about jazzing up the background fill too much if you don't feel confident with doing something really fancy. And then you could either pebble inside the Dresden circles. I liked Karen's idea of the crosshatch in them, though. I saw that and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I like the crosshatch inside there. So you could do something different inside. You could do a big swirl in some, you could do pebbles in some, you could do the crosshatch in some, and just kind of try something different with each one. So you can say, okay, now I've done that. And with this one, I kind of liked the way it looked like a spider web with the spikes coming out. So just a simple arc. And if you're using rulers, you can find, if you have some circle rulers, you could just use a ruler to just go from point to point with a nice little curve in there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It gives it, that spider web effect, which is nice.
Yeah, which the quilting that I've put on this drawing maybe is leaning more towards traditional, and the spider web might be not so traditional. So it might be kind of fun to throw that element in. Or put a spider web in Karen's flower garden.
Yeah. I think I will. I'll probably mix and match out of all the designs because they're all so different.
Yeah, no, you definitely should pull out some ideas that you like and make it totally your own.
And make sure you share with us.
I will. And at the moment, I use Omni thread as my main thread. And there's a glide I have and a bottom line. Would you use a bottom line on the top? I don't normally use it on the top, but for that amount of quilting, would you use a finer thread?
In the background, maybe, but for the rest of it, I don't think that it's necessary. But if you really want the background fill, especially if you're feeling a little bit nervous about backtracking lines, like say, for example, if you did the overlapping swirls, you've got little tiny areas of backtracking. And so if you're nervous about that kind of thing showing, then a finer thread is always going to disguise that a bit better.
Especially with layers of back, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but on the rest of it, I would use probably just a regular 40 or 60 weight at the most, probably.
I think Omni is my go. Superior threads, Omni, King Tut. They're the ones I have available here, mainly in the UK, but they're running low on stock due to COVID.
We have that problem here too.
Especially if you're using two battings, if you use a heavier thread, especially in the border, designs, you get more of a definition than if you're, for the main design elements, if you're using a heavier thread versus, the background fill in the center. So, if you're going through all that, you want to see it too. So, and have the definition between the different areas. So a lot of times I will mix the weights of thread for something like that, because if you use the finer thread, I would probably use a 60 weight for the fill, so it's fine enough to add interest, but not take away from your, dress steps, But I think we all have to experiment that with that, for ourselves to see what effect do we like, what happens when we do that. So that's a great piece to, experiment a little bit. And if you're not generally mixing and matching our threads, weights, then that's a great opportunity for you.
Mhm, mhm. I was also going to say, as far as thread goes, color wise, I would probably match the background in the light, and the orange match as close as possible. But out in here, you could use the same thread that you used in here. If you really like that orange, you could run that color right through there, or pull out your favorite color. If yellow is your favorite color, use yellow. But on the other areas, they would probably match. And the same thing in the Dresdens. You could choose the orange, or you could choose like something a little bit lighter. I probably wouldn't go with something too dark, because then you're gonna have the dark thread traipsing across the lighter fabrics, and you may not like how that looks as
Mhm.
much as the lighter thread going across a darker fabric. So, but yeah, some thoughts on thread color.
Yeah, because thread color in the Dresdens, I probably would have ended up going something like a silver, just so it doesn't show up as much.
Yeah, you could do that.
That's usually kind of my go-to. So I would pick probably a gray in a lighter weight, like maybe the Glide 60 or something. And because then, even though it's contrasting to some of them, it's so thin that you're not going to notice it.
Mhm.
And the gray, it pulls color. So if you
Mhm.
put gray across blue, it goes more blue. If you put gray across brown, it goes more brown. It's like kind of magical, like gray thread. Yeah,
It's-
Like a chameleon.
it is.
I certainly go through more gray than anything else that I use.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
I love them. I love them. They're really good.
We appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Yous are my rock stars. Honestly. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining us
Look forward to meeting you in person one day.
one day. Yeah, we hope so too.
Yeah, we want to get out of our studios.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Bye.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Latest Thread. We talked about some ditching, and we had an awesome guest. Jules shared her quilt, and we shared some ideas on it. So we'll see you again next time. Take care.
Bye.